In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your parking brake shoes on this Toyota Camry. If you need this or any other part, check us out at oneauto.com. Let's get started. Because this vehicle has a locking lug nut on the wheels, I'm going to break that free first by hand. That's this one right here. I do not recommend putting an impact of any kind on those locking lug nut keys. Having said that, I'm going to get the key, which should be with the vehicle, spin it until it lines up, press it on, use a 21mm socket and a long breaker bar to get some leverage. There we go, that broke free. Now I can leave it like this. You can use an impact to drive it out the rest of the way. You just don't want to break it free with one because the impacts from the impact can damage the splines on this little key. Now use a 21mm socket and your tool of choice to remove the rest of the lug nuts. With those off, remove the wheel. Now use a 14mm socket and remove both of these bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. If you wanted to take the caliper and the bracket off as an assembly, you're just going to have to use a 17mm socket, and I'll show you exactly where those bolts are in a second. But it does make things a little bit more complicated because you have the brake hose in the way. Sway bar link's going to be kind of in the way, so I like to just take this off first so that I can get better access to the bigger bolts. Once again, 14mm socket. Take this off and set it aside. Now we have these two 17mm bolts that hold the caliper bracket onto the knuckle. Let's break them free and remove them. There we go. Take this out. And take the second one out. And then you can remove the bracket with the pads. Now you should be able to remove the rotor. Mine is actually stuck on the hub here. You can see it's pretty rusty, so what I'm going to do is use a rubber mallet and tap it from the backside here where I remove the caliper. It gives me a nice access area where there's no backing shield. Okay, perfect. Now the only thing holding us up is going to be the parking brake shoes. Sometimes you can get the rotor off at this point, just slide it off, but sometimes they will hold you up. So let's pop this little grommet out. There we go. And now through this hole, we can access the adjuster, which I can't really show you now because it's inside of there and I can't really even see it myself, but I can show you it once we get the rotor off. The adjuster is going to look like a little star wheel, and you'll have to use a screwdriver or a little pry bar and spin it. Looks like I'm going the wrong way. For me, I have to spin it down. If I spin it up, it actually expands the shoes and catches onto the inside of the rotor even more. That's quite a few turns there, so that should be good. Yep, now we can remove the rotor. And with the rotor off, I can show you exactly what that looks like. This right here is that adjuster wheel that I was moving with my screwdriver. I was turning it downward in order to contract the shoes. Of course, for you, it may be different. You might have to spin it the other way, especially if you're on the other side of the vehicle. But spin it one way or the other to get the shoes closer together and allow them to let go of the rotor. I'm going to spray brake parts cleaner all over to get rid of most of the dust that's here. Before I take anything apart, I'm going to clean the hub. That way I don't have to do this once the new shoes are on and I don't contaminate anything. So take a wire brush and clean off the surface, especially right around the hub bore here where the rotor actually sits on, and of course the rest of it. I won't coat it with anything yet. I will coat it later, but I just want to clean it off now. You don't have to get it looking brand new, but you do have to remove all the rust buildup and rinse it off. Let's remove the adjuster. Take a screwdriver and pry the shoe out like that. That should allow you to get that adjuster popped off of there. There we go. Remove it, set it aside. And remember which direction it goes in, with the threads facing towards the rear of the vehicle. That's how I took it off. Nothing bad will happen if you put it on backwards, but if you're used to spinning it one direction to loosen it and another to tighten it, it's good to put it back the same way. That way the next time you have to come in here, you don't get confused. Now let's remove the spring over here. You can either pry it out with something, screwdriver, pry bar, or you could just grab it with needle nose pliers here and move it out of the way. Now we have to remove the spring retainers here, holding the pin from the back side. You have to push in on the spring. As you can see, it pushes in like that. When you do this, you should be able to spin the pin so that it can go through the slot. Mine is a little bit rusty, so it's difficult to spin. If you need to, you can grab some needle nose pliers and spin it with that, but be very careful if you're reusing this hardware. Spinning it like this with pliers can actually break the head of it, and then you'll need new hardware because it won't lock in anymore. As soon as you line it up, it should slide through like that, which will release the shoe, so you can take the spring out, push your pin out the back, or you can leave it in here if you want. It does have a slot there that it can come out through. And up top here, we need to remove this blue spring. I mean, maybe it's not blue for you, but it's blue for me. And the way I'm gonna do this is with some needle nose locking pliers. I'm just gonna grab it and pull it up that way. Make sure your locking pliers are hanging on tight if you're using this method. Just like that. This fell, but this went on like this to separate the shoes, and then that spring went through this hole. So keep in mind which direction that goes and where it goes. Now we're left with the shoe, and all you have to do is just slide it off of this pin. This is your parking brake lever. So when you activate your parking brake, this is what pulls on the shoe. This is one shoe. Let's get the other side off. And here's that spring that we removed. Make sure that when you put it back, it goes back in the same area. And of course, I'm going to show you that, but just make sure you save them, because this is not going to be the same as the spring for the other shoe. Same deal on this side. It's just going to be a little bit easier because there's no parking brake lever. I'm going to start by popping this spring off. This one you can just twist out of there, remove the spring, and save it. If it's in good condition, of course. If it's not, you're going to want to replace them all. And there's your parking brake shoe. Now we're going to have to do some cleaning here. You can see the areas where the shoes ride. You're going to want to wire brush those off, as well as up here and down here. There's another spot where the shoes ride. And the parking brake lever here on this pin, I'm going to clean it off. It's not rusty or corroded, but it does have debris on it, so I'm going to just wire brush that and then re-grease it when the time comes to reinstall. So that's all set. And now let's wire brush this whole area. You don't have to get this looking brand new. Obviously, it's never going to look brand new unless you replace the backing shield. But at this point, we can grease the areas up where the shoes ride. I'm using silicone paste that is rated for high temperatures. Make sure that whatever you're using is rated for high temperatures so this doesn't melt as the brakes operate. And just put a thin layer everywhere where the shoes touch, which is these areas on the sides, up here on this pivot point. You just want to have it all nicely lubricated. If you don't do this, it's going to create squeaks, noises, and obviously excessive wear because it's dry metal on metal. Of course, we're going to do the same to this side. And you want to make sure you don't put too much, because if you put too much on, it's going to get all over the inside of your rotor where the shoes ride, and that's not a good thing if you grease that area up. So keep it thin on the layers. Grease this up just in the areas where it touches the shoes, like that. Both of these shoes, front and rear, are exactly the same, so it doesn't matter which one you install where. It just matters that you don't install them upside down. To start, I'm going to put this forward one on, basically the same way we removed it, just in reverse order. I'm going to hook this spring onto this area, and then I'm going to try and hook it onto this pivot point here, just like that. Get that spring to sit over. Make sure the parking brake lever sits on here. And then let's put the pin and the retainer spring in this one so that the shoe can sit flush up against the backing shield. Hold this in place, get that pin through. Now let's get the spring reattached, lined up. Use your prying device tool of choice here and push that spring in. And then you're going to want to try and turn the pin just like that from the back side. There you go. That should seat it right in place there. Now you're going to want to take this shoe. Don't forget to put the parking brake pivot through it as well, or the parking brake lever. Put that shoe over, line it up into position. I know I didn't put anything up top in yet because I want to put the spring and the retainer pin on first, just like so. Okay, now let's get this piece on. Slide it in there. Make sure you slide it on the right way. The smaller opening on the forward shoe and the larger opening on the shoe that has the parking brake lever, or pivot, I guess I should call it. And now let's get that top spring in, hook it onto the shoe, and we'll pry it over that. Make sure the bottom of that spring goes right in that slot. Push that in place. That's properly attached. We only have a couple things left, one of which is going to be this adjuster. Mine still has plenty of grease in here, so I'm just going to clean this off and re-grease it. If yours is not greased properly and it's seized, you're going to want to unseize it first, and that will just entail, well, unthreading it, cleaning it, and if it's in really poor condition, consider replacing it. I'm going to take this apart. I'm going to take that same silicone paste that I used earlier and stick it right in here. Lubricate all the threads, lubricate the non-threaded area, and I'm going to take this and just thread it on all the way. This is going to work that grease into the threads. Should be nice and smooth. If you put too much on, just wipe it off. It's just going to squeeze out at the end like that. And put this side in. This should already be greased in there from my brush going in. And I'm going to grease the contact points of where the shoes will contact this adjustment lever. That way they don't squeak when you apply the parking brake. This is going to be a little bit difficult to see just because it's fairly tight in here, but I'm going to slide the adjuster back in, making sure I put it on the same way it came out. Obviously it's not going to catch yet. We need that spring at the bottom. Speaking of, here it is. Let's hook it on. It's got some oval slots that it hooks into. It's a fairly weak spring, so you don't need a lot of force to put this on. So hook it onto the shoe. If it's not in all the way, make sure you tap it in so that it can seat itself and lock in. There we go. And now we can put the rotor on and adjust the parking brake. I'm going to clean up the backside of my rotor where the hub mounts so I can get a nice flat seating surface for the hub onto the rotor. I'm also going to clean out in here where it was stuck when we removed it. Now take your rotor and slide it back on the hub, and we're going to adjust the parking brake shoes now. There we go. Actually, I have perfect engagement here on the parking brake shoes. You can just barely hear it touch. When I spin the rotor, I will put 2 lug nuts on to get an accurate measurement here, but when I spin the rotor, it doesn't spin forever, but it also doesn't immediately stop. This is exactly what you're looking for. But just to get an accurate measurement, I will put a couple lug nuts on here to put pressure on the rotor. Otherwise it could sit at an angle, which will basically not read the pressure on the parking brake shoes correctly. That is perfect. If you had to adjust it from here on, you would use the adjuster at the bottom that we cleaned earlier and spin it. You can just do it through this hole, or you could take the rotor off and do it that way. But mine are all set. This is honestly perfectly adjusted right off the bat. These are new shoes, so they are contracted all the way. In the future, when it needs to be adjusted, I'll just have to expand them. Now I'm going to use some anti-seize and put it all over the hub surface here, especially in the center where the rotor is going to sit and most likely seize if it will, and I would like to avoid that. That's why I'm coating it. You don't have to put too much. If you put too much, it'll actually start flinging as you drive, and you don't want to use anything that will liquefy with heat, so a thin layer of anti-seize will do the job. You just want to coat all the bare metal areas that you cleaned up. Now take your rotor, slide it over, just like this. Take this plug and plug the rotor up. Now let's get the caliper bracket with the pads back over the rotor. Line it up, put in the 2 bolts. Snug these up. The torque for both of these bolts is 58 foot-pounds. And 2. Now get the caliper over. Make sure it lines up with the slider pins. Get these bolts through, bottom them out, and then the torque for both of these is 20 foot-pounds. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 76 foot-pounds. Once again, 76 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. There you go. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it was helpful. If you have anything to say, leave it in the comment section below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you can stay up to date with all of our latest content. Thanks for watching.